And we are in 2 Samuel, and specifically today we'll be going through chapters 13 through 18. So just a few chapters here, not too many. It's quite a lot of story, quite a lot of information. I absolutely recommend you read these chapters in your time if you have not already read that. If you're in Bible Recap, we've already gone through that. But if you have not been able to read these chapters, please do. It's tough to read. It's challenging. There's a lot of weirdness, a lot of evil. It's kind of depressing, so I definitely don't recommend it being your bedtime reading story, but it is also, I think, really telling of what we'll talk about today and just how when God is absent from our lives, evil just is going to abound. And so to start with, I will tell you just quickly a story. So I'm a little bit of a country boy in how I grew up. Like, I grew up in a town called Huntsville, but it's down south. If you've gone to Houston ever, you've seen the same Houston statue, that big, tall, white statue. That's Huntsville. That's how we mark the south side of Huntsville. The north side of Huntsville, we mark it with the giant prison that you see right next to the highway. So Huntsville is a very interesting town to have grown up in. I love that I am from Huntsville. No offense to Huntsville. I don't want to go back and live in Huntsville. My family's still all there, so I'm always happy to see them. But my grandparents actually lived outside of Huntsville. So you think Huntsville's the sticks? Well, living outside of Huntsville is really the sticks. It is the countryside. And my family kept cattle. They were in the cattle business, and so there was a bunch of like pasture land where all these cows were at, acres upon acres of it. And when we were kids, we'd love to just go out and explore the pasture land. We'd take, sometimes my great-grandfather would take us on the four-wheeler, or my dad would walk us down to the creek, like in this photo here. When we were a little bit older in this photo, we would sometimes just go by ourselves because, we're kids, like, what are we going to really get up to? And we could manage ourselves for the most part as long as we stayed in the several hundred acres of property. I promise, I had great parents, and they definitely loved me and watched over me, but sometimes we got to just, explore on our own. It was in these times that we would explore on our own that we inevitably would have one of us, typically the youngest, Jonah, come crying back to the house, running top speed, crying because one of us allegedly had bullied him or pushed him down or called him names. And we would just continually, without parents or grandparents, some kind of supervision, we would just slide into name-calling, bullying, just selfishness. And looking back, it's not that we hated each other, right? Me and my brothers were very, very close together. Some of you guys got to meet them when they were here a few weeks ago. We're very close. We love each other very much. But we're at that age especially, we just lack guidance and accountability. And that guidance and accountability is what helped us treat each other well with love and respect. So like in this photo here with my dad in the photo, we're smiling, we're happy, we're having a great time because he's guiding us along and making sure that we're treating each other well. And us being with my father ensures that we're also not only treating him well, loving him well, but loving each other well. You can already start to see the analogy that I am trying to put here. We still had our disagreements, but in his presence, there was a sense of order, there was a sense of safety and even affection that we could not maintain for very long on our own. And that's the picture that we're going to kind of talk about with 2 Samuel chapter 13 through 18. That when God's presence is ignored, when his voice isn't sought out, and his wisdom is sidelined, even the people who are part of the same family can end up hurting each other deeply. So without God, we don't default to peace, we really just default to chaos. So we'll look at these 6 chapters, and you'll see, if you read it on your own, you'll see that God's name is rarely mentioned throughout this. If it is, it's just mentioned in passing, and what we instead see is just this devastating cascade of evil. We see in these stories, we see rape, we see revenge, we see murder, rebellion, and a civil war to top it all off. And this is what happens when God is pushed to the margins of our own lives. Exciting stuff. You ready to get in? So first we'll look back at the good old days, okay? The glory days. And just to recap a little bit about who Israel is, where we have come from to get to this point here, because if you just jump right in and this was your first semblance of who the nation of Israel is and who David is and his family, then you've got like a terrible image of everything. Like this is just a really rough crowd and not the type of people you would want to be around. But we know that the nation of Israel is a nation that is a promised nation, a promised family coming from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And he's the God who delivered them out of slavery from Egypt, across the Red Sea, parting the waters. He gave them many signs and wonders. He gave them the law. He led them visibly day and night, but then when he gave them that law, it was so that they could be with him, that they could worship him, that he could have a relationship with him, that it was not this distant, unfamiliar relationship, but it was something that they could be able to have togetherness with their God. And despite all of their failures through the wilderness, God remained present in their tabernacle because of their relentless still pursuit of God. And then they come into the promised land, this land that was promised to them, to their ancestors. They come in and they continue to obey. The nation of Israel obeys God's commands. We see it like with the walls of Jericho, right? They literally were so obedient that God said, okay, you're going to take over the city, but I don't need you to really have swords or anything. I just need you to walk around it. Just walk around it and trust me. And they do. And they really are obedient to God. And we see that when they are obedient, that God delivers them. Joshua's leadership really reflects that dependence on God when he says in Joshua 24:15, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the nation of Israel really in this time was trying to also emulate that same thing that they see from their leader. And then we also see the judges as well. Lots of ups and downs. That's also not necessarily a bedtime story there in the book of Judges, but we see the cycles of sin throughout this book where Israel is finding themselves in the consequences of their own sin, so they cry out to God, and God raises up some kind of a deliverer, and then they are walking with him for a short while. And during that short while, even if it's only for a season, they're close with God, and they're being blessed. They're really prospering through that time. And then there we have the rise of the monarchy. Right? We see Saul, and he starts off great. He looks like he's the guy. I mean, not only is he tall and handsome, I mean, come on, like me, like tall and handsome, you know? And he's tall, he's handsome, but then he starts to do things his own way. He starts to decide, maybe my power is actually my power, not the power that God has given me. And I want to hold on to this control, and I don't need necessarily God. He stops going to God for things. He stops asking God for advice and trusting in him. He really is reactive in taking control of the situation rather than relying on God. So he loses the throne, and now we see David. And David comes into this nation, this promised nation, this nation that God is dedicated in saying, I want this nation to be a city on a hill, to be a light to the world, to be something different than the nations surrounding it. And David really does look like he's the guy. Right? He is described as a man after God's own heart in 1 Samuel 13. Under David's leadership, especially in those early years as a king, Israel is doing really well. There's stability, there's growth. They really look like they're in favor with God. And we see that a lot of times there's this, in the Old Testament there's a lot of times where there's some kind of alignment with God that they have, and God is with them, and they see they look different than the rest of the nations. Yes, they're prospering and all those things, and that's great. We don't necessarily always get the riches and the wealth because we're following God, but we see even more so of how they treat the people around them being so much different than when they are on their own, doing things their own way. The poor are forgotten. The way that they treat each other is just awful. And so there's glory days in this, but however, unfortunately, we're not going to be looking at the glory days much more. However, so David's kingdom, right? He's just very different before this dark period, right? Last week we were looking at the story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah, and that David just seems vastly different than the David before, being this man after God's own heart. Before this dark period, we saw that David, again, was a man after God's heart. He was somebody who sought God's will. Whenever he seemed like he was cornered or he was preparing for battle, he would go to God. He would ask God for help with his decisions and deciding what it was that he needed to do in order to best serve his nation. He continually sought out God's presence, even bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, where he was also making the center of his Israel kingdom. He made that the center of worshiping God. And so we see in the early days that David is really pursuing God and trying to be what it is that God had intended for this kingship to be. But after last week, nothing really was quite the same after David's abuse of Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. We saw last week that Nathan, the prophet, prophesied to David that the sword will never depart from your house. And so when David really just stopped actively seeking God, he didn't just stay neutral. He was hanging back last week. We saw that. He was hanging back from the battles. He was not really part of his nation. And when he wasn't really neutral, he started to drift towards darkness. And we see the consequences of a lot of this take place in these chapters. And so the absence of God is evident in these chapters because we don't see in this time that David inquired of the Lord. We do see mentions of God, but it's things like people talking about this is not what God desires, or for my Lord the king is like an angel of God, or the advice of Ahithophel was like that one who inquires of God. There was not mention of David talked to God, or Absalom inquired of God, or we don't see these things really take place. There's no prophetic voices in this passage. There's no worship and seeking God's will. These characters really are, a lot of the time, acting purely on their own human wisdom, their emotions, and their own manipulation. And so what we'll get into next is with chapter 13. And chapter 13 is a really tough chapter to go through. And it covers a very sensitive topic in this, including sexual abuse. And while talking through this, I want to approach this all with great caution and respect, because I know that this carries a lot of weight, especially for those who have experienced this kind of trauma. And so just let me be clear from the outset. I'm not a spokesperson or an expert on this issue, and I don't pretend to speak from an area of known experience or lived experience. I know that words, especially from someone who has not walked this road, can fall short. And my heart here is not to explain away the scriptures or to speak over the pain, but to really just open up the scriptures together with humility and care. To see that God, even amidst this chaos, that we can see God amidst all of the chaos of this chapter and throughout our lives as well. Because this sin is wicked. It's evil. And the pain that it causes is real. It's lasting. And so if you've been affected by abuse, if you know someone who's been affected by abuse in any way, please hear this, that God sees you. He doesn't overlook your pain. He doesn't minimize your suffering. He is not silent, even when others have been silent. He's near to the brokenhearted, and his justice is not asleep. So, with chapter 13, Amnon is one of David's sons, and he's fallen in love with his half-sister, Tamar. So, different mothers, same father, David. He's fallen in love with his half-sister, Tamar. And Amnon and his cousin decide to set up this wicked, evil plan for him to have a moment alone with Tamar. And he takes that moment, and Amnon tries to bring Tamar to bed. Tamar tells him no, and even tries to reason with him as well through that. But he overpowers her, and he rapes her. Tara Lee, with the Bible recap, actually had a really great thing to say about this moment. She said, "Lust is impatient, selfish, and not open to reason." It's the opposite of what we read about in love with 1 Corinthians. Amnon's so-called love turns it to hate for his half-sister Tamar. He kicks her out of the house. He doubles down on his own wickedness. In Jewish law, Amnon is required to marry Tamar because of this act, or at least to honor her with a bride price, but he does none of that. Amnon's avoiding that responsibility of his own actions, and instead, when he throws her out, she's now seen by their society as untouchable, as destitute. Her life is ruined. No one in this culture is going to marry her now. And so she'll be consigned to live childless and alone. And the text really does emphasize just how wicked this is by saying that nothing this wicked should be done in Israel. And we see just how far the nation of Israel has fallen. First, being a nation where the poor are taken care of. If you go and read the laws that are in there, there's things set up to take place and take care of those who have been abused and oppressed and who are poor and fallen short of their own circumstances. But none of that is happening here. We see people who are abused and tossed to the wayside here, and is not what Israel was supposed to be. It shows how far they've fallen from God's standards. And as she's mourning her situation, her full brother, Absalom, which is David's third son, has her live with him and his family. So Absalom hates Amnon for what has happened. And after 2 years, he's going to plot a plan to kill Amnon. But in reading the chapters of, I'll back up just real quick, reading the chapters of chapter 13, verse 21 was the one that just really irked me. I just got upset with it. I'll read it to you. So it says, when King David heard all of this, he was furious. And there's nothing else. There's nothing else that is said about this that David did. This terrible thing had happened to his own daughter from one of his own sons. And as that father, he did nothing but just get angry, right? We don't really know why David did nothing, but we see that even David is not the man that we had first seen when we were first introduced to him. The most agreed upon speculations as to why he didn't do anything is that the guilt of his own sins with Bathsheba and Uriah could have paralyzed him from seeing that sin in his face now, because the people around him knew what he had done, and to then call out his own son for doing something exactly the same, that could have stopped him. That really could have paralyzed him or made him scared to really call that out, because he got away with it. But if he now calls it out within his own family that knows what's going to happen, then it does not mean that he shouldn't have. He definitely should have done what the law had required and really sought out protection of his own daughter and justice for that. So I was really angry with David, and I had to remember the specific mindset that David is described as a man after God's heart, but he's still a man. And mankind is ripe with sin. Knowing myself and knowing what I'm capable of, mankind is ripe with sin, and knowing where David's been and how he has relied on God through the ups and the downs of his life. He has had moments where it looked like he was at death's doorstep with being chased by the king Saul and all of these things. He has had to rely on God. And in this moment here, we do not see that same reliance and dependence on God, but it's still the same David in this. I just really had a lot of pity for him in this moment because I know where he's been, what he's capable of. And I think it's just really important to think about other people in the Bible as well, like Peter, right? We see Peter when things are good, but also when things are really tough for him, he's clinging on to God. Like when he's walking on the water for that half second that he's actually walking on the water, and then he looks down and he starts falling. He's clinging to Jesus because he knows that if he's to let go, he's going to drown. And I think that it's really important for us to think about our relationship with God in that way, because I don't think in this moment David's really thinking about God as somebody I need to cling to or else I will drown. So now let's talk about Absalom. Absalom has gotten he's a guy. Not so sure I would use him as a role model in any way. So the Absalom's can really be described in first with his revenge, right? He plots to kill his own brother Amnon, and he does so at a feast. It's through manipulation, it's through brutality, and he uses hospitality of for his brothers as that weapon, and trust end up becoming betrayal for that. David, in the same exact action, is then paralyzed by his own grief and probably his own guilt as well, seeing what his son has now done again that is very similar to him, his brother now killing somebody for a sin committed. And then we see manipulation as well. Absalom first Joab, which is David's military commander, gets Absalom to come back by convincing David through manipulation to bring him back. David's deceived, but then he's like, I don't want to, my son can come back from being out on the run, but now I don't want to see him anymore. And so they, for 2 years, just avoid each other, right? And then they finally do see each other, and it's just pretty short. They like kissed each other on the cheek, and like that was it. Like they were, all right, good to see you, all right, bye. And this partial reconciliation just really leaves a lot of bitterness unresolved. Because in Absalom's defense, I don't really want to defend this guy too much. He's not the best of people, but he sees what has happened to his sister. He sees his father do nothing about it. It makes sense that he's angry. It does make sense that he's angry. But there's no conversation about what's happened between the two of them, and instead it's just left to leave bitterness to continue to fester in between them. And then we see 4 years of Absalom just systematically undermining David's own authority. And it says that Absalom stole the hearts of Israel. And that in those 4 years, he's going up to people and that are trying to reach David and ask for help or be the judge over matters of disputes. He decides to take that into his own hands and help people with their disputes. And so by helping all of these people and shortchanging David and his own responsibility, the people really start to like him. Because he's not really doing justice. He's just doing whatever the people that are coming to him want, right? He's not actually seeking justice. He's just manipulating the people further to get what he wants, which is to get his father off the throne because he thinks that he can do it better. And so from this rebellion, we see the son drive the father from the throne. The kingdom is torn apart. It's brought into civil war, and this house is divided against itself. The house that David had built up through his obedience to God and through following closely is now shattered. And then in chapter 18, which we'll open up into for a little bit, is we see David and Absalom at war with each other. And we see them in a battle together. And David is constantly telling his commanders, whatever you do, make sure that Absalom is not touched. Make sure that he is not hurt. Keep him safe for whatever is needed. And Absalom ends up being caught in a tree. And despite David's orders to be gentle with his son, to be gentle to this rebellion leader, the one who wanted to kill David, the one who really wanted to get him off the throne and was angry with him in that rebellion, David tries to be gentle with him, but his own people do not follow those orders and end up, Absalom had this like long hair and it got caught in a tree, and then they ended up brutally murdering him as he's hanging from this tree. And so David's grief is just struck. So we'll start here in 24, where after the murder takes place, we see that David is waiting to hear the reports from the commanders. And it says, while David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported. The king then said, if he is alone, he must have good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man running alone. The king said, he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man, the king said. he comes with good news. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king." The king asked, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz answered, "I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was." So David doesn't even acknowledge that they won the battle, that the civil war can be done with. He's just wanting to know, what happened to my son who's betrayed me. What happened to him? So the king says, "Stand aside and wait here." So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all those who rose up against you." The king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man." The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and he wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." There's a lot of things David has done wrong throughout these passages and things that he didn't do that he should do. But I do still think that this is a man after God's heart, even though it's just really tough to see right now. And I see it right here in the last verse, because I see us doing this same thing to God, right? We rebel. We want to fight against God, what God has in store for us. We want to do things on our own. And Jesus knew that we were going to be doing all those things, those evil things that we do day in, day out. When he went up on the cross, he made it so that he died instead of us, because we should have been the ones that died. We should have been the ones that had paid the consequences of our sin, which was ultimately death. And we see here that David's desire for his rebellious son to just come back to him, to really make this right, to make this relationship whole again, and that it can no longer be that way, has just ruined David, and he is just struck with guilt. I didn't have that written down. I see that verse there, and I just can't help but think of a little bit of how God and our relationship with God really works, and seeing God's desire for us and to be with us, and even throughout our constant rebellion of him. So David's sin with Bathsheba, Uriah, and even his sins of not doing anything in these passages, it had consequences. Amnon's sin had consequences, and Absalom's sin had consequences. That sin drove isolation from God, and without any repentance, without any action being done, that just led to more sin and more evil. Each character took that isolation from God, that not being near to God, in their own ways. Amnon, he followed lust. Absalom, he chose revenge over justice. David became passive and indecisive. And Joab, David's commander, acted with brutality in the ways that he murdered David's own son. So the people as well were even in this. They were choosing rebellion over loyalty to the throne. When God is absent from our lives, when God is absent from my life, in my relationships, I can manipulate instead of love. In my conflicts, I could seek revenge instead of reconciliation. In my heart, I'll pursue power and control instead of service. And in my struggles and my day-to-day worries, I will rely on my own intelligence rather than on godly wisdom. Having God with us is vital, and I'll keep saying that several times because of just how much consequence there is when we don't have God as a part of our lives. Broken relationships that could have been healed. Decisions that haunt us because we didn't really ever seek God in those times, or just cycles of hurt that continue to repeat from our families or from our friends, or just how we continue to treat our other people in our lives because we try to just trust our own understanding. We see families that are torn apart by pride and unforgiveness when God is not really at the center of those, because violence and hatred become the norm when God's presence is marginalized. Yeah, there we go. So I think it's important to ask ourselves, where have I pushed God to the margins? Maybe I do pretty good on a Sunday morning, or maybe I do pretty good a few times throughout the week, but are there moments in your life where God kind of just sits to the wayside and I get to focus on me for this time? I get to focus on what I want because I've been a good servant to God so far this week or so far today. Now it's time for me to get what I want. And where have you pushed God to the margins in your own life? I think it's important to have times of confession and having moments with people that you trust on the regular to confess those sins, to have a chance to have somebody else hear those, but then talk about it with God together and come together in humility to tell God that I have sinned. We saw David do that with Bathsheba and Uriah and how he handled that, but he did go back to God, thankfully. He went back to God and repented of those sins because I don't know how, it definitely would have gotten worse. I don't want to know how much worse it could have been had he just continued to be in this cycle of sin after sin after sin with no repentance whatsoever. So choosing God's way and to be with God means that forgiveness is over revenge, and purity over lust, courage over passivity, truth over manipulation. The story of 2 Samuel 13 through 18 is a sobering reminder that when God is absent from our lives, evil abounds. And God is not absent by his choice, but by our choice. Because every day we choose, will we seek God's presence or trust our own understanding? Because the consequences of having God not a part of our lives, deciding to do things our own way, they're real. It's not just our own personal consequences, but it does affect others around us. It can affect our families. It can affect our spouses. It can affect our church and our community, our coworkers. The people around us can also be affected by that because when our hearts aren't pointing towards God, then our hearts are pointing to ourselves and not caring for the other people around us. So don't let these chapters that we've gone through describe your life. And I don't think it will mirror exactly like this. I would hope not, at least. But don't let even the principles of this story describe your own life. So instead, choose today to seek God first in every decision. Bring him into every relationship. Trust his wisdom over human counsel and walk in his presence every day. I do the Bible recap with a good group of people. I love being a part of the Bible recap group because I'm reading parts of the Bible that I definitely would never read on my own. Proverbs is kind of cool, but Leviticus was rough, man. Like going through Leviticus, but then also at that same time, there's a devotional that we had every day with it where we get to see where is God in this? Where is God in these passages? How do we get to see his message that he has for us in these just ancient, kind of sometimes obscure texts, but having that daily time with God where I get to see just a little bit more of him, see a little bit more of his heart, and see just how much effort he took into having that relationship with me. It makes me want to have that relationship with him more and not abandon God. And so, to end with, will we seek God's presence or trust our own understanding? Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Let me pray. God, I just thank you that you have not abandoned us. God, that you are not absent, that you are still here, that we've just chosen sometimes, God, to just walk away, to ignore what you're doing. God, I just ask that we choose to be with you, God, to confess any sins that are in our lives, God, right now that are holding us back from being with you. We bring those before you with humility. We ask for your forgiveness, God. We just thank you for your love. We thank you for your relentless pursuit of us. And we lift up our praises to you. Amen.
Thanks for joining us for our sermon podcast. We would love for you to join us on Sunday morning or in one of our small groups during the week. And you can get more information about that at dentonnorthchurch.com.